Hello and welcome back to DukascopyTv. Joining me in the studio today is Michael McKay of McKay's consultancy firm. Michael, thank you very much for coming in today.
Thanks for inviting me.
No problem at all. Now, we're looking at the sort of similarities, if there are any, between the banking sector and also the tobacco industry, which you have quite a lot of experience in. Could you tell me a little bit about some of these similarities, please?
The similarities are really tenuous, I think, because the products essentially are quite different. One is a service, and there's no doubt that society needs banking, or at least banks, where they can have their money safe and go back and find it the next day. You can argue about whether society needs tobacco, and it's a retail product, so they're quite different. I think the common factor is that when businesses or sectors become very wealthy and very successful and very profitable, as tobacco has always been and as banking is today, that the leaders of these organizations often become deaf to changes in public opinion. That would be my central starting point.
Now, in your opinion, you say that bankers are constantly losing ground. What are your reasons for this, Michael?
Well, if you look at the regulatory framework and what's actually been happening, they're on two fronts, in my opinion. One is on the way in which public opinion has moved against that particular business sector in the countries which you're probably thinking of, the United Kingdom, in the United States with the collapse of Lehman and one or two others. In this country with the problems with banks like UBS and other banks. And so as a result of that, public opinion is in some cases puzzled, in other extreme cases outraged by what has happened. And then on the other side of the coin is the fact that the regulatory framework in these countries, which are all democracies where politicians obviously respond to public opinion, the framework begins to tighten. Sometimes the framework begins to tighten probably too quickly because the politicians understandably need to react to public opinion, and you then get yourself in a situation where you have a regulatory framework which may not be entirely appropriate. In other words, by appropriate I mean that if it's been prepared in haste, once it's on the statute book, as most people know, it's the devil's job to get it off if it's not quite right. So that's what I mean by them losing ground. A combination of public opinion and the fact that governments need to respond to this change in public opinion.
With all the negativity affecting the banking sector in Switzerland, you've got namely the compliance issues and also, the data protection and whatnot. Yeah. Regulations are getting tightened ever more so. But how can they turn bad things into a good thing, in your opinion? Well,
the fundamental in any business, just as it is in one's own life, is behaviour and consistency of behaviour. Out of behaviour comes a set of internal policies, essentially reflecting the new regulatory framework which has to be put in place. And above all, it's the leadership of the business and of the sector that is sufficiently aware and in tune to the changes in public opinion and to the way in which that particular industry is now viewed, that it begins to lead its organization in a way that brings it to a level of success which is not just financial, but in the other aspects of its behaviour as well. That's on the company side. On the other side, I would say that it behoves all of these companies within these sectors to do what they can to raise the level of knowledge about what they do. So leadership behaviour leads to trust and raising levels of knowledge in an open debate. And from that, you may then get an environment where regulation, because you can't stop regulation in a democracy, if that's the will of the people through people that represent them. But at least it's more reasoned and balanced. And that is an imperfect way of trying to solve a difficult problem. If that makes sense to you.
Yeah, I think it does. And with these problems, and taking it all into consideration, just what lessons do you think can be learned from what's happened so far?
Lessons learned from, in a general sense, or from the tobacco industry, I think the key thing is to listen, and that behoves the organization of a company to ensure that particularly the leadership, not just the CEO, but the people, that cadre of people around the CEO, are feeding and are fed by people who give honest and frank assessments of what's going on from the various what we call today stakeholders, so that they are in touch with the different opinions, not just the media opinion, but other different opinions. And so this reduces the danger of being blindsided by regulation and legislation when it comes. So that's the critical thing, is to be open, to listen, and then to be flexible, but above all, I would say, to be consistent and to be true in the behavior that's set by the company. If they do that, it's much easier then to begin to rectify a course which is going in the wrong direction. If the policies and the behavior is wrong, it doesn't matter how good the PR and the spin is, it'll never be convincing, in my opinion.
Do you think, therefore, that they can turn it round from the situation?
Specifically, you mean the banking sector?
Or from the banking sector
I believe
now?
it's never too late. And of course, because banking, I'm talking about bankers, but banking is fundamentally important in a society, we've got to do it. We have to do it. And so the question then is how. We've talked about how in a very general sense, but it's never too late. The difference is that if you get to a more extreme point where public opinion and then regulation is beginning to turn against a sector, it might well be the strategy has to change in some parts of balance and emphasis. But in my opinion, it's never too late. It can be turned around.
And from a citizen's point of view, you lived in Switzerland for many years now. How have you watched the industry change? Well,
it's changed in the respect, I think the primary respect, because banking is so important to the economy. I'm not sure what the percentages are, but it's probably in some parts of the country, maybe 15%, maybe even more of the economy. A very high level of regard and trust that bankers are held in this particular country, as in some others, and that seems to have been squandered and lost, and it's going to take some time for many of them to bring it back. Many of them don't deserve to be treated that way, but as you know, people tend not to discriminate between a good one and a bad one. They just say, oh God, a plague on all of them. It's unfortunate, but that's true.
Okay, but do you think there is still hope for the Switzerland economy and things like that?
Of course,
yes.
Of course, no question. No question.
Excellent. Well, Michael, thank you very much for your insight today. It's
Monica.
been a pleasure speaking to you. A nice alternative perspective there. It's good to look at the industry from another side. But thank you again.
Thanks for your time.
Now, that's all from Michael and myself for the moment. But the Dukascopy TV team will bring you updates before the weekend, so please stay tuned. Bye for now.